Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today we're going to be doing a brand new tier list, and that tier list is hand traps post Phantom Nightmare. And if you can't tell how excited I am to be doing another one of these, okay, so now we're here at our tier list, and I'll just quickly go over the categories we have, and then we're going to be ranking all of the hand traps that are relevant, or just in general of the game. First off, we have main deck staple. This should be no surprise. These are the best available options. If you can play these options, you absolutely will be. Main or side, these are options that you probably don't have to main deck, but if you choose to not to main deck them, you probably will be siding them at some capacity. Side deck only, these are hand traps which you definitely cannot main, but if they're going to play them, they're 100% side deck only options. Experimental side deck is things that are more niche interactions, so you may choose to side deck this card if you're playing it at all. And then the don't play category is like the category that we just don't want to play at all because you're going to be free. So I'm going to start off with the main deck staple options, and big surprise, first card we're putting here is Shifter. Dimension Shifter is literally the card that makes anything that is not the top two decks, like Voiceless Voice and the Fire decks, it makes them somewhat playable in this meta. If your deck can facilitate Shifter, you're going to play Shifter. It's a turn skip for the Fire decks. It can hurt Voiceless a little bit, but not overly, not an overly huge amount. So again, play this if you have it. And then the other option I've got for this is Draw and Lockbird. Draw and Lockbird, it's quite simply the best hand trap that really can't be played around very much. If you have an option to play around Draw, then you essentially going to do the same combo line anyways, especially for the Fire decks. Voiceless, that deck, I'm not exactly too sure about the intricacies of that deck, so maybe it can shut them down, maybe it doesn't, but ultimately Droll and Shifter are the best two hand traps available, and then everything else is like, I feel, debatable. So controversial topic, Ash Blossom, main or side. I am convinced if Ash Blossom was not a fire monster, that you would not be playing Ash Blossom in the Fire decks, at least for the main. You'd definitely be siding it. But that's not what's going to happen. It's going to be a main deck staple. Everyone is going to play Ash Blossom outright. But if it wasn't a fire, I actually don't think Ash Blossom is that good right now. I think it's actually kind of mid, where it just has such a low impact on the Fire decks. It doesn't really prevent them setting up their end board at all. And if they have the extenders there, then it's almost like you never used a hand trap. In fact, you're probably playing with less cards. So now you've got to beat them with one less card. And in that same light, I feel as though Imperm and Veiler are very similar in that regard. And what I mean by this is, so the Voiceless Voice deck has anti-targeting protection, so you can't target them at all, really. Then that kind of prevents what these guys do. And in the Fire deck, well, they have a card called Kieran, which can make fire monsters dodge targeted interaction like Veiler and Imperm. They're just not very good right now, but if you wanted to play them in main or side, I can understand it. But I personally am not liking these two and would probably opt to play something else. I guess, and in a similar light, I guess Ghost Mourner kind of goes along with the Veiler Imperm line. Although I think Mourner is a better card to choose because, one, you can still use Mourner under Shifter. Mourner also has a burn effect, so you can use it for like as a cheese win in time for life point manipulation. It still does the same effect negation, but it's got to be, and it can be used during the draw phase or the standby phase, which is maybe something that comes up. So who knows? But it's definitely just another option. Not 100% stable, but main or side option. Next is for this outer is Ghost Bell. Ghost Bell to me is in an interesting spot where I think it's like an okay thing to interact with the Fire decks, but as a standalone hand trap, I'm not sure it's very good to like stop them doing the combo. I personally prefer this card to like as a defensive option for the Fire decks to like prevent something like Soul Release. But ultimately, I think Bella is definitely a good side deck option if it's not a main deck one. It can be good against Labyrinth as well. So outside the Fire deck, it has a utility. It can prevent against the Runic decks, which, let's face it, no one likes Runic decks. So it's got some utility in the format, and I think it's fine if you want to main or side deck it, but I personally think there might be better options out there. So just like recap, all these ones here, you can play them in either main or side, but these are the two up the top, Droll and Shifter. If you can play them, absolutely play them. They're the best ones available. Next for side deck only, we've got first one is good old Ghost Sister and Spooky Dogwood. Yeah, you're not main decking this. You're only playing it if you just need a way to modulate life points when you get close to time. That's the only reason you play it. So it's side deck only. Bystials next. So for the Bystials, it's pretty simple. They're not very good because, again, a lot of the fire decks, the only dark monster they'll have is Diabellstar, the Black Witch. And outside of that, it's just not very good because the decks are mainly playing fire. So you can side deck these if you want, but I wouldn't recommend it. I think there's better options. Like, for example, DD Crow is another option here. I personally would prefer DD Crow because I think it can be more impactful to like banish their one Garunix. Or if they go for a target Avada in the graveyard, you can DD Crow that Avada when they target with Promethean Princess. If they go for the Flame Birch effect and only have 2 level 1s, you can banish one of those level 1s and they can't resolve the Flame Birch. So I actually think DD Crow might be a little bit of a better option when you like are looking for like a side deck staple in this scenario. So like I think DD Crow might be a little bit better than the Bystial. Next up we have Phantasme, and I think Phantasme is a really good side deck option here. In fact, it could actually be like up into the next category because the whole fire deck is just playing nothing but link monsters these days. And when the fire deck's playing nothing but link monsters, when they put 2 on the board, this card can be a draw 3 to put back 2. So it's helping you cycle into the card you need, like to help break down their board, which can be very difficult without specific non-engine. And just like the layers of interaction without without very precise cards, it's very hard to break their board. And Phantasme is like a really interesting card that can help get you to those non-engine cards. And then another controversial option for the side deck only category is Nibiru. Now, a lot of people are probably watching this and thinking Nibiru should be main or side. It should be a main deck staple. It should be it should not be this kind of option. Well, if you actually look at what the good players are doing, a lot of them are looking at the format in a way to say, how can I do my Fire King combo to where Nibiru has the least amount of impact it can? Some of the combo lines I've been showing off where you actually set up Apo so that Nib's like really bad. Whereas like if you nib me at any point, I still have all my other lines available. Some people are doing the Promethean Princess line where they'll set up Avada and they won't link off the Flame Birch until after they've put out the Avada. So that way, if you do nib them at any point, they just get 3 bodies on board for free. So Nib's just, I think that in theory, Nib is only good versus a average to bad player who isn't thinking about how to play around Nib. And versus those players, you should be outplaying them anyways. So I would just say that I don't think Nib is as good as it might seem. Next, I'm going to talk about the Gamma and Delta parts. So for experimental side deck, I'm going to call these cards here experimental side deck. And the reasoning for that is we've been seeing a lot of OCG techs here using them. And what the theory is that if you start your combo off with Bonfire and you have Gamma, and then your opponent was Droll you have like another Call by the Grave to stop that Droll. So that can be something there. And then going second, if you Droll your opponent, you have the Delta to prevent something like Triple Tactics Talents, which can absolutely devastate you. So that's just like the theory of these things. I think they are experimentally viable, but I wouldn't say that. I think I'd need more testing to be convinced on them. Retaliating Sea, this one's an interesting card here. This is the one that when your opponent activates a spell card that special summons monster, you can special summon it to the field and then everything gets banished instead. Stuff like Original Sinful Spoils is a option to special summon monsters from the deck. So that's something you can consider about doing that to counter the fire decks, because they have to clear this and it can sometimes be really difficult just to clear this thing. So, and then all their cards are going to banish instead of grave, so they can't use like the Snake Eyes effect because they all say specifically send to grave, destroy and send to grave. like with Garunix. So this is actually really good. It's like a pseudo shifter that you could considerably play in like the mirror match side deck. Next is Ghost Ogre, and I'm gonna say this. I think Ghost Ogre is like very experimental. Sure, it can be used on the like IP Mask Arena, but generally they have another monster negate with that. You could maybe use it on the field spell, but if they have the Sanctuary, it's like really weak. You could attempt to use it on, say, like the Snake Eyes Oak or Snake Eyes Ash summon when they trigger their effects on summons, so that way they aren't on field and they have to recur them to be able to get everything back to use the Flame Burge. It's somewhat okay versus like the Runic matchup if they don't have like the ability to make Hugin. But again, it's like experimental. I wouldn't say it's like a great card, but I think maybe it's like with more testing you can find a utility for it if you have the space. Next is Lancia. I think Lancia is an okay card to play in the side deck if you want to use it. It can be like that other copy of like Ghost Bell to protect against, say, like something like Soul Release. It can also protect you from Evenly. It can protect against Cosmic Cyclone. So there's a few good options here for Lancia. If you have the space, it's something to consider because it just makes your board so much more difficult to out. And there's not really anything that you need to banish on your turn outside Ambler Whale, but if Ambler Whale's in grave, it's probably already gotten an interruption through. In the same light, you could probably say about Chaos Hunter is very similar. I think it's a worse version of Lancia, just because it requires your opponent to special summon to be able to summon it yourself. But once it's out, it's actually a really good card, and it could be good against some of the more rogue matchups. Like when someone goes for a shifter, you can special summon. Someone shifters you, and then they go for a special summon. You can summon the Chaos Hunter, and then the shifter is no longer applied, so none of your stuff is getting banished. Another experimental is Skullmeister, and for those of you who don't know what Skullmeister does, it's a card that negates an effect that activates in grave. So it's good against like the transaction rollbacks. It can be used against some of the Fire King stuff to like be another version of Ghost Spell. I would say it's like experimental in the fact that I don't think this card is very good. I think it's very susceptible to interruptions, and it's very easily played around. Like inherently, if you're playing around Ghost Bell, you're more than likely playing around this as well, so take that into consideration. It's also 1700 and a level 4, so it's actually got a good body on it as well, which we can just normal summon to attack. It's a Dark Fiend as well, so maybe in Labyrinth that can be relevant. But yeah, overall I would say there's probably better options available, but if you want to test this out, it's something you can test out. And then Cycle Reader. Cycle Reader is a cantrip that can quick effect discard from hand to banish 2 light monsters from the graveyard. So it could be useful against Voiceless Voice. However, I don't see it being I see it being a worse version of the Bestials and the Diddy Crow. So that's like where I'm at with this card, but it's experimental in the fact that you could test it out. And now for the don't plays. Ghost Reaper and Winter Cherry. Don't play this card. The fire deck doesn't care if you banish one thing from their extra. Like if you banish Little Knights, they don't care. They'll play something else. You banish the Promethean Princess, it's more like Little Knight control now. If you banish Apo, well, they can just end Promethean Princess Avada. There's so many different ways they can play the deck that taking away one extra deck card, it does not matter. There's no one crucial card. Token Collector, it's just bad at this point. Like there's no token based decks. We're past the time of Adventure being the Adventure engine being a staple and everything. Epsilon. This is the cipher that negates traps. There's not really any relevant trap decks that you'd want to use this on, except for like Labyrinth. And if you're playing against Labyrinth, you'd maybe want Ash and Bell more so. Flying Sea. This is the one that stops Exceed summoning. It's more dated now. It's from an old era. Iris Sword Soul, no. Again, Contact Sea, the Fire decks don't care about this because they all play IP Masquerena and they can just link this off with IP Masquerena or any other generic 2. No Material, bad card, don't play it. It stops you from using a monster to summon from the extra deck, but the Fire deck doesn't care about that because they just destroy the monster that's being locked. Orange Light, I'll say this, I'll put Orange Light here in experimental. If you're playing a fairy deck and then or a deck with enough fairies, you could try it. but there's not really viable decks that are playing enough fairies. The voiceless deck has 3 low, and if you want to use diviner, that's another 3. So it's potential like 3 orange light, that's 9 fairies. You could try it out. I personally wouldn't, but it's viable as an option. And then Saravis is a main deck staple if you're playing the right deck for Saravis. It stops targeting, so that's another reason why I don't like Impermanent Veiler, even against Voiceless, because they have Saravis, they have targeting protection, just a lot of things that make these cards not very good. And I know I've talked about the Fire deck a lot in this tier list video, but it's for a good reason, because you have to take everything into account with how it interacts with the Fire deck, because the Fire deck is what's going to drive the format. So if the card is bad versus Fire, then it's probably going to be bad for the upcoming format. And yeah, so that's it from me, guys. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. I'd love to hear your opinions. Let me know what you would do differently. And yeah, I'm Retro YuGiOh. See you next time. Like and subscribe.